Sweet. So we'll just jump in right here. So this is the long version of the vendor list that I tend to have clients start with. It's not exhaustive. Every market looks different. And so in every single market, you're going to need different people. Truly in my area, having somebody that can reinforce foundations and basements would be something that would be on the list. And yet there are many areas that basements aren't a thing. And so there's a lot of room for editing and tweaks here. But I have found this to be a good starting place. And the key, I would say, with this vendor list is you need more than one person or company. And while it's obvious, while it would be obvious to say we probably have our favorite inside of each category, you at least need to have someone else that you're vetting and someone else that would be a solid runner-up or somebody that you haven't yet disqualified. Because I found out, and I don't know if you've gotten to hear any of my horror stories, but I found out the hard way many times, especially in the handyman general contractor categories. People can be great for a small amount of time or for a long amount of time, but we eventually get to a point where they do something that's so horrible that we can't use them again. And if you don't have that backup, if you don't have the bench, then you're scrambling and your level of service that you're offering to your clients or to your renters really deteriorates until you find the next person to take their place. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing that you can take from this is just the way it's laid out is on purpose. We should be looking to have 3 solid choices inside of each category, which if you look at how many categories there are, that's a challenge. Like that it's constantly a matter of who else belongs on this vendor list, which category do I have 1 person or 0 people for, and how do I find somebody that belongs on that list? Another one that I want to get to today, and I'll go ahead and just add it, is I want to talk about property inspectors. And so as you can see, the way I do things, like nothing is ever set in stone. It's always a work in progress. And so we're going to come over here. You see that that's the full version. Okay, so we're going to switch gears then, and we're going to look at the short list. I have taught prior classes on this, and Sheldon, if you want a copy of the recording of the last time that I taught this, inspectors are up there. That's why I didn't need it to be down here. I really delved in the last time I taught about this on the top 3. I spent a lot of time talking about property management, lenders, and a title company. And I think truly that was like over an hour, just those 3 people. So what I want to do today is I want to start at the bottom of the list and work my way up the other way and just see what all falls out from that as far as who you're looking for, tips and tricks and that sort of thing. So it's a really small class today. If you guys have any questions, just speak up, or if you want to give your own input or 2 cents on a topic, it's probably would be greatly appreciated. Let me make sure really quick. Yes, I've got the recording on. Okay, so I'll just start at the bottom. Accountants and tax advisors. I think you both know this, but most of us start at a point and where we just assume that our accountant is our tax advisor. And then we start hearing these weird success stories, often from investors, but even real estate agents, about how so-and-so helped them save $100,000 on their taxes, or you hear stories about Donald Trump pays no taxes, or fill in the blank with whichever prominent figure it is. And we start leaning in on our accountant even more, and they're not stepping up the right way. And it has taken me years to be able to admit that they're actually usually 2 different people. Your tax advisor usually is not your tax accountant. They serve 2 different roles. They're 2 different personality types. And unfortunately, I don't think inside of the real estate business, we're told that they're 2 different people. So just having the awareness that usually the accountant persona isn't also going to be your most aggressive tax advisor, that can be really helpful in giving you the right framework for moving forward. I'll be honest, I don't have an actual tax advisor. I have directed clients to tax advisors at certain levels. Tax Alchemy is a company that I really respect a lot. and where I tend to point someone who's just in the beginning stages of wanting to investigate and see, is it time for them to have a tax advisor? I've gone more the route of what rooms do I need to surround myself in to be getting some of that advice from people who are paying for tax advisors. But then I'm the middleman with the information, right? So it's up to me to take a tool like cost segregation and figure out how do I actually end up with a cost segregation study that I can take to an accountant in a usable way such that they can reduce my tax bill. It takes time on task, which for me works really well because I'm growth oriented. And so if I'm learning something new, I've always come at it from the approach of, if I can learn something new that works for me, then I can go and save my investors hundreds of $1,000s, and I come across as the hero because I'm the keeper of the information. Whereas if I had a tax advisor who was working directly with my tax accountant, I feel like I might lose out on some of that information. But I do like to say they're two separate people, and you're going to be investing a resource. You're either going to be investing time and putting yourself in the right rooms and the right conversations to learn what you need to learn about taxes to make sure that you're saving where you can save, or you're going to be investing dollars in an actual tax advisor that can go in and maneuver things and help you get to a point where you're fairly paying the taxes you need to pay to the government, but not a dime more. So accountants are a tricky hotspot. The other thing I'll say about accountants is I found just in my decade-ish of working with them that an accountant can be really good when you first start. And accountants are one of those roles, they don't necessarily grow with you as you grow. And so it's normal to replace an accountant every 3 to 4 to 5 years. That's totally normal. And you need to be really clear on why you're doing it, what service you're not getting, or what, usually it's like a lack of communication or just a complete lack of willingness to have a conversation around a tax savings idea. Like usually that's what starts this process, or they're just putting their foot down. I've seen accountants absolutely refuse to run payroll for clients, which is silly. Like that's absolutely right inside your wheelhouse. Why would you not run payroll for a client? So I would say be aware of that too, that the accountant relationship often runs its course every 3 to 5 years and you're looking for a replacement. The other thing I'll say is at least every other year, having an alternate accountant look at a year's worth of filed taxes just to give recommendations or a second set of eyes can be incredibly helpful. We switched accountants last 3 years ago, I think. And the reason why we switched was it took her about 4 minutes to see that our accountant wasn't filing any standard depreciation on our portfolio, which is so silly. Like I have no idea how that got missed. And I'm not an accountant. I, at that point, couldn't look at my tax returns and see that that wasn't happening. Like I had no idea. I feel like I'm a lot more well-versed now in reading tax returns, but truly you don't know what you don't know. So I would say at least every other year, you should have a second accountant look over things and be open to, if they catch something medium to major, right? Like it might be time to give them a shot, or it might be time to discuss like, what would your services look like? How do you feel like you would be able to better support my business than this current person? What are your fees look like? The other thing I'll say is that a lot of people kind of get stuck with an accountant relationship that they're not in love with, but you know that they're the cheapest person in town, and it's hard to want to switch and give anyone else more money. But that's exactly why I would say you need to have somebody else who's going to be willing to look at your books every other year. And I don't care if that auditing process costs you a few $100s. It would probably be well worth it just for the peace of mind of knowing that something big isn't being missed, or for the awareness that something huge like standard depreciation was being missed on multiple years worth of tax returns. I would lump into that tax advisor category. I would totally lump into their a firm that can do things like cost segregation studies, which is a tool for bonus depreciation. That would be something I would totally lump into that tax advisor category. And so me personally, I would say you have to be able to talk about cost segregation. If I'm being honest with you, I still can't talk about it super smooth. I recorded a video earlier this week that'll post next week, I think, to the newsletter about cost segregation. And I pretty much rambled for 12 minutes to explain it. But I know the basic concepts, right? Like I know how and why it works. I know that it's slowly being phased out unless the government chooses to extend it. And I think even if you stumble through it, you being able to give a 12-minute version of some of these tax savings tools that the government is offering really sets you apart when you're working with investors. They don't expect you to come to them with ideas that can save them hundreds of thousands of dollars on taxes. Yet, if you do that one time, you've earned a client for life. They'll never forget that. They'll never forget that you've had X, Y, and Z tool that absolutely changed how many investment properties they could buy one year, because instead of paying taxes, they were able to pay for 2 additional down payments on investment properties. So this totally, from the growth-oriented standpoint, you being kind of the keeper of the information really can make you irreplaceable when we talk about working with other investors. Questions or additional comments on either the accountant or the tax advisor person?
Yeah, we've had each of those problems with accountants. It's always a lack of communication. It's always because, hey, what is the strategy? Have we done this? Can we talk about it? We did a cost seg on 3 properties that we own, and we never even saw the final report. Our new accountant was like, yeah, the guy did a pretty good job. I see what he did here and here and here. But I don't know. That's just how it goes. Things always start well with accountants, and then like you said, so we're used to that. We've never worked with a like a specific tax advisor, so that's interesting. And I wrote down that name of that company, so we'll look into that.
Yeah, it's one of those you almost have to leap before you know for sure where the landing pad is with tax advisors, which is why people that know don't often take the first step. You often are paying your deposit or whatever they call it, your retainer, before you see the value to prove that the relationship is going to be beneficial. And honestly, truly, if you're below a certain threshold of income, and I would probably put that around 300,000. Like if you're below $300,000 in gross income, it's not going to be beneficial ever for you to have an actual paid relationship with a tax advisor. Your best bet is going to be just to put you in the right rooms to glean the information that you can glean yourself. And then you need to get well versed at speaking to your accountant. And I think I've told both of you, my accountant, anytime I ask her anything, her first line of defense is always, if you're wanting to do something that's going to put me in jail, you can just go find another accountant. Like that, I have heard her say that, I don't know, 15 times in the last 2.5 years. And so I always take a step back and I say, that's not what I'm wanting to do. I'm asking. And for her, what I've learned is the question to ask is what would need to change about these facts such that X, Y, or Z would be possible. And if I approach it from the back door, if I approach it from the right, like, let's give an outlandish example. What would need to change about my business or the way that you perceive my business such that my weekly manicures were a business write-off, were a business expense, right? Like fill in the blank with whatever it is. But if for me and her, if I approach it like with that backdoor type of a question, then she tends to let her guards down and we can have an actual conversation about what might work. And I'll tell you too, from an accountant perspective, you want somebody that's going to be protective of you and their license. You don't want that person that is just going to go with everything and willy-nilly, because what's going to happen is 2 or 3 or 4 years later, the IRS will catch up with you. And I've had that happen with the client. Every year for the last 3 years, the same client has gotten an audit and has owed an additional $40,000 to $80,000 in taxes because her accountant was crazy and wasn't justifying any of what she was writing and marking as expenses. And it's come back to bite this client. And there are things that at the right time, we probably could have produced some proof of, but 3 years after the fact, there's zero way that you can go back and produce what you need. And now at this point, the IRS feels like they haven't gotten their money for 3 years. So it's that $40,000 plus fees and interest, which really kind of sucks. So yeah. Anything else here? Any other questions or comments?
I don't.
Now, I shouldn't say that. You said that it's wise to go out and hire another party. And I think you did mention a company that you use.
Tax Alchemy, I have directed several clients to.
Okay.
Yep. What I like about it, there's one guy that's the face of the company, and I'm actually not sure if he's the owner, if I'm being honest with you. But they definitely fit into the tax education space. You can find videos on YouTube. You can find, they're out there to help, to engage with potential clients by offering help. And I feel like that really does set them apart from a lot of other people. So, yeah, so they would be a good place to start as you're looking into all of that.
Okay, cool. Thank
you.
All
right, sure. So moving up my list, then the next person I have on the list is investors. And this one, for those of us who are investors, we tend to overlook this, right? So as real estate agents, we understand the importance of having investors on our vendor list, right? Or investors on our communication list. But as investors ourselves, we often overlook the importance of having other investors on our list. And why I would say that's super important, just take off your real estate agent hat for a minute, and we're just going to come at this from an investor standpoint. The reason why that's super important is because you're not going to buy every single deal that lands in your lap. And regardless of whether or not you're an agent, sometimes we need to offer a solution to these sellers. And if it's not you, but you know who the solution is, you still come across as the hero. The second reason I would say is really just investor networking matters at a really high level. And I've been slow to warm up to that idea. I've been really slow to warm up to networking in general because it just feels like a waste of time. But I will say purposeful conversations with other investors, when they're serious and they're vetted and that you know that they know what they're talking about, always produces a result. I learned about cost segregation from another investor about 5 years ago. Maybe it was 6 now. Nope. Maybe 4 years ago. I got talking, I had mentioned a little bit earlier in the class, in my area, foundations aren't necessarily an issue, but we have a lot of basements, and so sometimes those basements walls need reinforced. I got a lead on a contractor that we used for years that was more than half the rate of installing piers than anyone else I had previously been able to find from an investor. And so knowing other investors, networking with them, being a bit of an open book and being willing to share, here's what's working for us, or here's someone that might really be able to help you with X, Y, and Z area that you're struggling with. And then just keeping in mind, it's really helpful to have investors in your corner who have a different buy box than you. And if you hand them a deal, chances are they're going to turn around and hand you a deal back. So I would highly recommend, even if we take off our real estate agent hat, being intentional about which investors we network with and which investors maybe could do a deal that's way bigger than the deal that we could currently do on our own. And so in what situation might we consider partnering with another investor? And partnerships are tricky. I'm not always a huge fan of partnerships, and I tend, if I'm being honest, to talk more clients out of partnerships than help them walk into a partnership. But especially if we're thinking about flipping a big property or something where the plan to hold it would be 3 years or less, I think partnerships can be a really cool route to get that done. Real estate agents, this one is exactly the opposite. So having multiple real estate agents in your back pocket makes tons of sense as an investor. And we often discount that as a real estate agent ourselves, right? Like we often don't think about networking or being potentially ready to use other real estate agents, their vendor services, if we ourselves are a real estate agent. And so what I'll say about that is so we own 30 doors. It's like we own a quadplex and a duplex, and the rest are single family. So you can do the math on how many properties that is, 24 or 25, somewhere in that range. I purchased 4 of my properties from the same real estate agent that two of them she handed to me off market. So she handed them to me before the listing went active on the MLS. The other 2 she handed to me the day before or the day that they were going to expire with the seller's bottom line price. And had I not so nicely rubbed shoulders with her, right? Like had she not felt like I was capable and had integrity and all the things, like I can only imagine I wouldn't have gotten access to any of those 4. The last 2 that didn't hit the MLS probably would have sold, but the 2 that were expiring, she wouldn't have gotten her commission on. I know that for sure. And those 2 were the first 2 that she handed me. And then I got the 2 that were before they hit the MLS after we did business with the first 2. So having a good relationship with other real estate agents, having real estate agents in your back pocket, even as an agent, can really matter and can make all the difference in the world. Truly, I shouldn't have had access to any of the information that I had access to. She just wanted to get the deal done, and she knew that I had a good reputation for closing. I shouldn't have known the bottom line price that the seller was going to accept on those 2 properties. And then the other 2, she really probably shouldn't have handed me the information before it hit the MLS, but she did. And we created I have every belief that it created a win-win in all 4 of those situations. But they've turned out to be great properties that I've been super happy to hold in my portfolio. So I'm a big fan of real estate agents teaching classes on investing inside of the Market Center. I think that's a fantastic opportunity to just continually show your expertise, right? These are the types of properties that I work really well with. And just continually raise your hand. If you've got a property that matches that investment category, I'd be happy to look at it with you or to help you do the deal or whatever. And regardless of the topic that I taught on, the last year or 2 that I was really active in the Market Center, every single time I would teach a class at the Market Center, I would walk out with a deal. And usually it was a listing. Usually it was a lower price listing that an agent decided they were too good to work, but they heard that they heard me say that I work with a lot of investors, and they were happy to hand me the listing for a small referral fee. And I was super happy to work that listing, and usually ended up double ending it because I had the buyer too, right? And so again, it created a win-win. Why agents go out of their way to believe that they shouldn't work below a certain price point, especially when they're hungry, makes no sense to me, but they do it all the time. And so I've always been there and been super happy to capitalize on that. As an investor, the other thing I'll say about that is I think it's really important. And one thing I've seen a big investor in my area do that I've really admired and respected, just networking with real estate agents and making it clear that you're there to pay, like you'll make sure they get paid on a transaction. I think that can really set you apart and can really give you access to a lot of deals like the ones that I happen to get a hold of. The investor in my area that I'm thinking about made a really big deal about, hundreds of agents in town know him, and they know that if you're the first one that brings him a deal and he ends up buying it, he's going to work with you on that deal, and you'll get your commission. And if it's a deal that's good enough for him to buy, and for some reason the seller isn't paying a commission, he'll pay the commission on that deal. And I think that has really given him a massive advantage. So again, like I would just say networking with other agents, making sure they know, like, if you hand me something, you're going to get your commission. Truly, that's what most of these agents want. Agents don't want a percentage of ownership in a deal. They don't want the wholesalers finder's fee, right? They don't want that. They just want to know that they're going to get their 2 or 2.5 or 3% commission, or 1, or however much it is. They just want to know they're going to get their little tiny commission, and then they'll be happy to walk away. And if you're crystal clear on, you provided the deal, we can absolutely make sure you get your commission at closing. I think you could have access to tons of business that really probably just isn't being had right now. That's a win-win solution for all the agents that are unwilling to work the investment properties.
I agree.
And it's just like, being top of mind really matters in both of those areas, which is easier said than done. With investors, I would say you really have to vet them a little bit and make sure that they're worth staying top of mind, right? Like, I really stayed top of mind with a guy who at one point owned 100 investment properties. He owned about 60 by the time I got to know him. And I helped my investors buy about 30 of his. I never listed a single property for him. He always represented himself, because that's just who he was. But I got 30 closings that in all likelihood I wouldn't have gotten had it not been for staying top of mind with him, even though I actually never got to represent him on a deal. Real estate agents, you don't have to vet. Real estate agents are a little bit different. You just need to continue to be the squeaky wheel of, if you've got a property, I can make sure you get your commission at closing. I'll pay you on a deal, right? Like, we'll make sure that you get paid. And I think you probably would be surprised how many additional pieces of business you could pick up from that. We can kind of lump some of these specialized contractor services all together. So tree service, I've learned over the years, in my area at least, you probably want someone specific for tree service. And there's the normal, like, the limbs are touching the roof type of an issue that probably a general handyman could solve for you every couple of years. But having an arborist, having someone that can actually come out and reasonably quote removing a dead tree in my area is massively, massively important. And this is one of those services, like, I really might not even need this guy every single year, but when I need him, I actually need him, and I need that price to be reasonable. And this is one of those services I've seen prices vary by as much as 3 times for the exact same amount of work. And so having a good, reliable, reasonable guy kind of really matters here. Electricians and plumbers, again, junk removal, I would lump into that same exact category. Oftentimes a general handyman can do all of that, and yet knowing who your reasonable person is for each of these categories, should you need, in the case of electricians or plumbers, should you need someone licensed, having someone who's really reasonable and reliable matters. In the case of junk removal, depending on how nasty the job is, I've learned that sometimes a general handyman really upcharges that work because they don't want to do it. And so having that guy who's specialized, I got 2 quotes on a house, and it was full of junk, but a general handyman quoted me $4,000 to remove everything in the house. And it was a big house, and it was full of a lot. An actual junk removal guy quoted $1,200. So I used the junk removal guy, and I was super happy that I had someone on my list to fall back on. The junk removal guys, I've learned, or in my experience, they tend to stay, they're more steady. They don't tend to be like revolving doors like some of the other contractors are. the same junk removal guy will probably be in business for a decade or two. And if you find one that's reasonable rates and they show up when they say they're going to, and they do the job the way that you thought they would, they're probably going to be pretty steady like that. So it's one that for most investors isn't high on the list of having a junk removal guy. But what I'll say is that's a category you really only need one or two. And if you find one that's reasonable, you can probably call that good on that category and move on and work on filling some of your other categories. But I've seen personally that having a junk removal guy can save you thousands.